They laughed the moment the black maid touched the piano. The sound spread across the ballroom like breaking glass beneath expensive shoes, sharp, careless, cruel. Alina Brooks froze beside the grand piano, her dark fingers still hovering above the polished ivory keys while crystal chandeliers burned gold above her head. The Moretti Foundation Gala was the kind of event New York's elite waited all year to attend. Politicians stood beside CEOs. Women draped in diamonds held champagne glasses worth more than most people's rent. Every inch of the ballroom shimmered with old money and quiet power. And in the middle of all that luxury stood Alina in a simple black maid uniform, suddenly feeling smaller than she ever had before. Careful, one man joked loudly from the bar. If she scratches that piano, she'll be paying it off for the next 100 years. More laughter erupted. Alina lowered her eyes immediately. She had learned long ago that humiliation passed faster when you didn't react to it. But tonight was different. Tonight every stare felt heavier somehow. Maybe because Vincent Moretti was there, the owner of the hotel, the man newspapers called America's most untouchable businessman, the man people feared without ever saying the word fear out loud. Vincent stood near the marble staircase at the far end of the ballroom, one hand tucked into the pocket of his tailored charcoal suit. Even from across the room, his presence changed the temperature of the air. 6'3", broad shoulders, dark hair swept neatly back, a face carved from control and silence. Men twice his age lowered their voices when he entered rooms. Women straightened their posture, hoping he might glance their way. But Vincent Moretti wasn't looking at them. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on Alina Brooks. "Play something," his fiancée Vanessa said suddenly, swirling her champagne with a smile too sharp to be kind. Diamonds glittered around her neck as she stepped closer to the piano. "You were staring at it all night. Don't tell me the help secretly dreams of performing at Carnegie Hall." The guests chuckled again. Alina felt heat rise behind her eyes but forced herself to remain calm. "I should get back to the kitchen, ma'am," she said softly. Vanessa smirked. "Oh, come on, entertain us for 30 seconds. Unless you only know how to dust expensive things." The room erupted again. Someone near the back even lifted their phone to record. Alina's chest tightened. She hated this feeling, the feeling of being trapped between dignity and survival. She needed this job. Her mother's medication alone cost almost $900 every month, and her younger brother's community college tuition was already overdue. Losing this position inside the Moretti estate would destroy everything she had spent 2 years rebuilding. So slowly, with trembling fingers, Alina walked toward the piano bench while whispers followed her across the ballroom like smoke. She sat carefully beneath the chandelier light, her black uniform stark against the white marble floor. Her hands rested above the keys, frozen, silent. Then Vanessa leaned beside the piano and smiled cruelly. "See, I told you. She doesn't actually know how to play." Another burst of laughter echoed through the ballroom. But before Alina could stand, before she could escape the humiliation swallowing her whole, she whispered something so quietly that only one person in the room heard it. Vincent Moretti froze where he stood, because the maid had just spoken the last sentence his dying mother ever said before she closed her eyes forever. The laughter died so suddenly it almost sounded violent. One moment the ballroom buzzed with cruel amusement and clinking crystal glasses, and the next there was only silence beneath the chandeliers. Vincent Moretti had not moved. He stood near the staircase exactly as before, one hand still inside the pocket of his charcoal suit. But something in his face had changed completely. His jaw tightened, his breathing slowed, and for the first time that night, uncertainty flickered across the expression of the man everyone feared. Alina immediately realized what she had done. Her stomach dropped. She should not have said those words. She should not have spoken at all. But hearing Vanessa mock the piano, hearing those people laugh at something that had once saved her life from falling apart, had broken through the wall she spent years building around herself. "Sir," apologize," she whispered quickly, standing from the piano bench. "I should return to work." Vincent ignored her apology entirely. His eyes stayed fixed on her face with terrifying intensity. "What did you just say?" he asked quietly. Nobody in the ballroom dared speak. Vanessa forced out a nervous laugh and stepped closer to Vincent, resting manicured fingers against his arm. "Baby, she is obviously trying to get attention. It is not that serious." Vincent slowly removed her hand from his sleeve without looking at her. That tiny movement sent visible tension through the room. Even the musicians near the stage stopped breathing. "Answer me," Vincent said again, his voice lower now. Alina swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to stay silent. Men like Vincent Moretti did not ask questions twice. "Your mother," she said carefully, "used to request Claire de Lune every Thursday night at St. Mary's Hospital." Vincent stared at her as though the world had tilted beneath his feet. Across the ballroom, older guests exchanged confused glances. Vanessa frowned impatiently. What is happening right now? But Vincent still did not look away from Alina. "How do you know that?" he asked. His voice no longer sounded cold. Somehow that made him even more dangerous. Alina lowered her eyes toward the piano keys. The polished ivory reflected the chandelier light like tiny pieces of glass. "Because I played it for her," she said softly. The room went completely still. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, a champagne glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered against marble, but nobody turned toward the sound. Vincent's expression slowly emptied of everything except disbelief. 17 years disappeared from his face all at once. Suddenly he was no longer the untouchable head of the Moretti empire standing inside a 5-star Manhattan hotel. He was just a frightened 17-year-old boy again, sitting beside a hospital bed while his mother fought for one more breath. And every Thursday night, somewhere down the hallway, a piano had played through the sterile white corridors of St. Mary's. Soft, gentle, human. His mother used to smile whenever she heard it. "The angel is here tonight," she would whisper weakly. Vincent had searched for that piano player after her funeral. Nurses told him it was a little black girl visiting her sick mother on the cancer floor. Nobody knew her name. Nobody ever saw her again after that winter. Until now. Vanessa shook her head with visible irritation. This cannot seriously be why everyone is acting dramatic. Her sharp voice cracked through the silence like a knife. It was a hospital piano song from 20 years ago. Who cares? Several guests forced uncomfortable smiles, hoping Vincent might laugh and end the tension. He did not. Instead, he slowly walked toward the piano, toward Alina. Every polished shoe in the ballroom remained frozen against the marble floor as the most powerful man in the room stopped directly in front of the maid nobody had noticed an hour earlier. Then Vincent Moretti spoke 6 words that made the entire ballroom nervous. "Play the song for me again." Alina stared at the piano keys as though they belonged to another lifetime. Around her, the ballroom remained suspended in absolute silence. Nobody reached for their drinks anymore. Nobody whispered. Even the servers, standing beside silver trays, looked frozen beneath the chandelier light. Vincent Moretti waited directly beside the piano. His dark eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her pulse shake. "Play it," he repeated quietly. Alina's throat tightened. She had not touched a real grand piano in almost 12 years, not since the scholarship auditions, not since hospital bills replaced sheet music inside her mother's apartment. Her fingers hovered over the ivory keys, trembling slightly beneath the golden light. Then finally, slowly, she pressed the first note. The sound drifted softly through the ballroom like warm smoke, delicate, fragile, human. Conversation disappeared completely. Claire de Lune filled the enormous room with the kind of quiet that forced people to feel things they spent years avoiding. Vincent did not move. He stood perfectly still beside the piano, while memories he buried long ago began clawing back to the surface. The sterile smell of St. Mary's Hospital, the soft hum of fluorescent lights after midnight, his mother lying weak beneath thin white blankets while snow fell outside the hospital windows, and always, somewhere down the hallway, a piano. Sometimes shaky, sometimes imperfect, but beautiful enough to make his dying mother smile through the pain. "That girl plays like she is praying," his mother once whispered to him with tears in her eyes. Vincent had never forgotten those words. He had simply forgotten what hope sounded like until now. Alina kept her eyes lowered while she played. The melody wrapped itself around the ballroom, transforming crystal and marble into something softer, more honest. Guests who had mocked her minutes earlier now stared in stunned silence. One older woman near the front discreetly wiped tears from beneath her mascara. Even the musicians standing near the stage looked shaken. Vanessa, however, looked furious. "This is ridiculous," she snapped suddenly, her heels striking sharply against the marble floor as she stepped closer. "Everyone is acting like she cured cancer because she can play one sad song." Nobody laughed this time. Vanessa's expression tightened further as she looked around the room searching for support that never came. "Vincent," she said sharply, "she is staff. This entire scene is embarrassing." Vincent slowly turned toward her. The movement alone shifted the energy in the ballroom. He did not raise his voice. Somehow that made the moment colder. "Do you know what my mother's final weeks looked like?" he asked quietly. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. "What? Do you know what it sounds like when someone realizes they are running out of time?" The room remained motionless. Vincent glanced back toward Alina as the final notes drifted into silence. "Every Thursday night," he continued softly, "my mother waited for that piano to start playing because for 5 minutes she forgot she was dying." Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. "Okay, but what does that have to do with her?" Vincent looked directly at Alina again, really looked at her. Not as a maid, not as invisible staff moving silently through his mansion hallways, but as the girl who unknowingly sat beside the worst nights of his life and made them bearable. Alina finally stopped playing. Her hands rested quietly in her lap while the last note faded into silence. "My mother was on the same floor," she explained softly. "Room 814. She had leukemia." Vincent felt something inside him shift hard enough to hurt. 17 years ago. While he sat beside his dying mother feeling completely alone, another frightened child had been sitting only feet away, carrying the exact same fear. And somehow, instead of collapsing under it, she chose to bring comfort to strangers. The ballroom stayed silent as Vincent Moretti realized something that unsettled him deeply. The woman everyone mocked tonight possessed more grace in one trembling hand than most people in that room would ever have in their entire lives. The silence after the music ended felt heavier than the music itself. Nobody in the ballroom seemed to remember why they had come there in the first place. Expensive champagne sat untouched. Conversations died unfinished. Even the city skyline glowing beyond the towering glass windows suddenly felt far away. Alina slowly stood from the piano bench, keeping her eyes lowered as though she could already feel the weight of every stare pressing against her skin. She hated attention. Attention usually meant danger, humiliation, people asking questions she could not afford to answer. "You never told anyone," Vincent asked quietly. His voice no longer carried the cold authority that ruled boardrooms and terrified competitors. Tonight it sounded almost human. Alina shook her head softly. There was nothing to tell. Vanessa let out a short laugh filled with disbelief. "Nothing to tell. You somehow know Vincent's dead mother, play dramatic piano music in the middle of a gala, and now everyone is supposed to think this is some touching movie scene." Her words cut sharply through the room, but the reaction she expected never came. Nobody laughed anymore. Several guests actually looked uncomfortable hearing her speak that way now. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Her face tightened. "Oh, please," she snapped, folding her arms. "She is still a maid." The sentence landed hard against the silence. Alina lowered her gaze further, her fingers instinctively tightening against the fabric of her uniform. She had heard those words her entire life. Just a maid, just housekeeping, just staff, just invisible. People always found elegant ways to remind poor women where they belonged. But Vincent's expression changed instantly. Something dark flickered behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, disappointment, the kind that arrives when someone reveals who they truly are. Slowly, Vincent turned toward Vanessa. "Do you know what my mother used to say about people who mock workers?" he asked quietly. Vanessa rolled her eyes slightly, clearly irritated by the direction of the conversation. "Vincent, this is getting ridiculous." But he continued anyway. "She said the fastest way to expose an ugly soul was to give it someone weaker to look down on." The room went silent again. Vanessa's face flushed slightly as several guests shifted awkwardly nearby. Alina wished the marble floor would simply swallow her whole. None of this felt real. 2 hours ago, she had been carrying silver trays through the ballroom, hoping nobody would notice her existence. Now the most powerful man in the room was defending her in front of New York society. Vincent looked back toward Alina, his expression softer now. "Why did you stop playing?" he asked. Alina hesitated before answering. "Because my mother died 3 days after your mother did." The words came out quietly, but they shattered something invisible inside the ballroom. Vincent stared at her without speaking. Alina swallowed carefully, forcing herself to continue even though her throat tightened painfully. "After she passed away, I could not touch a piano anymore. Every song reminded me of hospital machines and empty chairs." A woman near the front covered her mouth emotionally. Vanessa looked away with obvious frustration, as though compassion itself annoyed her. "I sold my keyboard when I was 16, Alina admitted softly. "We needed money for rent." Vincent felt a pressure building slowly inside his chest. He remembered his own mother teaching him how to tie a necktie before chemotherapy treatments stole the strength from her hands. He remembered promising himself as a teenager that one day nobody in his family would ever struggle again. And somehow, somewhere between power and survival, he had forgotten what struggling actually looked like. Until tonight. A waiter passed quietly through the ballroom, carrying a silver tray of champagne, but his hand trembled slightly. Everyone felt it now. The shift in the room. The uncomfortable realization that the woman they mocked carried more quiet sacrifice inside her than most of the wealthy guests surrounding her. Vincent glanced at the piano once more before looking directly at Alina. "You sold your piano to survive," he said quietly. "And somehow they still convinced you to feel ashamed tonight." Nobody moved, nobody spoke, because deep down, every person in that ballroom knew he was right. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like judgment. Warm chandelier light still reflected across crystal glasses and polished marble floors, but the atmosphere had shifted into something tense and painfully honest. People who had spent the evening laughing now avoided eye contact with the woman standing beside the piano. Alina could feel it, the sudden guilt hanging silently in the air. She wished she could disappear from it all. Her heart still pounded hard against her ribs as she stepped away from the piano bench. "I should go back to work," she said quietly. Vincent looked at her immediately. "No." The single word stopped her completely. Vanessa exhaled sharply in disbelief. "You cannot seriously be doing this right now." Vincent ignored her. His attention never left Alina. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. Alina hesitated. 8 months. 8 months, Vincent repeated slowly, almost to himself. His expression darkened slightly. 8 months under his roof. 8 months walking through his hallways unseen while carrying a past connected to the most painful part of his life. And nobody told him. Nobody noticed her. Nobody cared enough to ask who she was before putting her in a uniform and teaching her to stay invisible. A cold realization settled heavily inside him. He had built an empire so large that human beings were disappearing inside it. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Vincent. This is becoming embarrassing for everyone. This time Vincent turned toward her fully. The room stiffened immediately. Embarrassing, he repeated quietly. Vanessa nodded impatiently. Yes, she is staff. The guests are uncomfortable. We are supposed to be announcing our engagement tonight, not listening to some tragic backstory from a housekeeper. Several guests visibly winced hearing the words out loud. Vincent stared at Vanessa for several long seconds without speaking. The silence became unbearable. Then finally he asked a question so calm it unsettled everyone in the ballroom. Do you know why my mother cleaned hotel rooms when I was a child? Vanessa blinked. What? Because nobody gave her another option. His voice remained quiet, but every word landed heavily against the marble walls. She worked 12-hour shifts with pneumonia because rich people wanted clean towels without looking at the hands folding them. The ballroom stayed completely still. Alina slowly looked up at Vincent for the first time that night. She had never heard him speak this way before. Around the estate he was known for precision, distance, silence. Employees lowered their voices when he walked past, but tonight there was something different beneath his calm exterior, something cracked open. My mother taught me one thing before she died. Vincent continued softly. She said the world reveals itself by how it treats tired people. Nobody moved. Vanessa laughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the tension. Okay, but this is not the same thing. She works for us. Vincent's expression hardened instantly. No, he said coldly. She works with dignity. That is very different. The room went silent again. Vanessa looked stunned, almost offended that he corrected her publicly. Across the ballroom, several executives quietly lowered their glasses. An older senator standing near the windows suddenly looked very interested in the city skyline instead of the conversation unfolding beside the piano. Shame traveled through the room slowly but visibly. Alina felt overwhelmed by all of it. The attention, the silence, the strange ache building behind her eyes. She had spent years teaching herself not to expect kindness because disappointment hurt less that way. Yet here stood Vincent Moretti, defending her in front of people who mattered more to him than she ever could. It did not make sense. Sir, she said softly, I did not mean to cause problems tonight. Vincent looked at her carefully, really carefully. Then his eyes drifted toward her hands, resting tightly against the black fabric of her uniform. Her fingers still carried faint calluses from years of piano practice. Tiny scars left behind by discipline, sacrifice, and dreams abandoned too early. Vincent swallowed slowly as another realization settled into his chest. The world had not simply ignored Alina Brooks, it had wasted her, and somehow that angered him far more than he expected. For several long seconds, nobody in the ballroom dared speak. The air itself felt tense beneath the chandeliers, heavy with the uncomfortable realization that the woman standing quietly beside the piano had become the moral center of the room. Alina wanted nothing more than to escape the attention swallowing her whole. Her cheeks burned beneath the endless stares. She had spent years surviving by becoming invisible. And tonight that invisibility had shattered in front of Manhattan's most powerful people. Vincent Moretti, however, looked more focused than ever. His dark eyes remained fixed on Alina, as though he were trying to understand how someone the world treated so casually could carry this much quiet strength. Then suddenly, Vincent turned toward the orchestra director standing near the stage. "Cancel the engagement announcement," he said calmly. The room froze. Several guests visibly stopped breathing. Vanessa blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me." Vincent did not look at her. "The announcement is cancelled." His voice remained steady, controlled, but the impact of the words slammed through the ballroom harder than any scream could have. Vanessa stared at him as though she had misheard. "Vincent, are you insane?" He finally looked at her then, coldly, quietly. "No," he said. "I am finally paying attention." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. One of the senators near the back immediately lowered his champagne glass. A socialite standing beside the dance floor awkwardly turned off the phone she had secretly been recording with earlier. Nobody wanted to be associated with the cruelty hanging in the room now. Vanessa laughed sharply, but panic had already started creeping into her voice. "You are humiliating me over a maid." Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "No," he corrected. "You humiliated yourself." The silence afterward felt endless. Vanessa looked around desperately, searching for support from the guests surrounding her, but nobody stepped forward. Nobody defended her, because deep down, everyone remembered the way she mocked Alina earlier, the way they all laughed with her. Vincent slowly walked toward the center of the ballroom floor, his polished shoes echoing softly against marble. "Do you know what I see when I look at her?" he asked quietly to the room. Nobody answered. Vincent glanced back toward Alina, standing near the piano in stunned silence. "I see someone who lost her mother as a child and still chose kindness instead of bitterness." His gaze hardened as he looked back at the guests. "And I see a room full of wealthy adults who laughed at her because wearing a uniform made you think she mattered less." Nobody moved. A few guests lowered their heads completely now. One older businessman near the windows looked genuinely ashamed. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly, her voice brittle. "This is absurd. You cannot destroy our engagement because of one emotional story." Vincent stared at her for several seconds before speaking again. "No," he said softly. "I am ending this because tonight I saw who you become when you believe someone beneath you cannot fight back." The words hit the ballroom like ice water. Vanessa's face drained of color. Alina's breath caught in her throat. She never expected this, never wanted this. "Sir," she said carefully, stepping forward slightly, "please do not do this because of me." Vincent turned toward her immediately. His expression softened in a way nobody in the room had ever seen before. "This is not because of you," he said quietly. "This is because of what tonight revealed." The chandeliers shimmered overhead, while complete silence settled once more across the ballroom. Then Vincent did something that stunned everyone even further. He walked back toward the piano bench, picked up the folded white cloth Alina used earlier to wipe fingerprints from the piano surface, and placed it gently into Vanessa's stunned hands. "If you believe her work is beneath you," he said calmly, "then perhaps you should try doing it yourself." Nobody laughed. Nobody even breathed too loudly, because for the first time that night, power had shifted completely. And everyone in that ballroom knew they were watching a woman once mocked as invisible walk away with more dignity than all of them combined. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the white cleaning cloth Vincent had placed into her hands. The expensive diamonds around her wrist glittered beneath the chandelier light. But for the first time that evening, nobody in the ballroom seemed impressed by them anymore. She looked around the room in disbelief, waiting for someone to defend her, to laugh, to break the unbearable silence crushing the gala. Nobody did. The silence itself had become judgment. Alina stood near the piano completely frozen, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She never imagined a single sentence could unravel an entire night like this. The same guests who mocked her less than an hour ago now refused to even meet her eyes. It felt unreal, dangerous somehow. Vincent Moretti stepped away from Vanessa slowly, his expression unreadable again. But the emotional distance between them had become impossible to ignore. "Vincent," Vanessa said carefully now, her voice softer, almost pleading, "do not do this in front of everyone." He stopped near the center of the ballroom without turning around. In front of everyone is exactly where it needed to happen. The room fell silent again. Vanessa swallowed hard. "You are overreacting." Vincent finally looked back at her then, and something in his eyes made several guests visibly uncomfortable. "No," he said quietly. "I spent years underreacting to the wrong things." The words settled heavily across the ballroom. An older woman near the orchestra lowered her head slowly, as though ashamed of every moment she laughed earlier. Two executives near the bar quietly set down their champagne glasses untouched. Even the hotel staff, standing near the walls, looked stunned by what they were witnessing. Powerful people rarely apologized publicly. They protected appearances. They protected status. But Vincent Moretti looked completely finished protecting either one. Vanessa's voice cracked slightly now. So that is it. You are ending everything because some maid played piano. Alina flinched softly, hearing the words again. But before she could lower her gaze, Vincent answered immediately. No, he said coldly. I am ending this because tonight revealed the difference between class and character. Nobody moved. Vanessa stared at him in shock. Vincent continued calmly, every word precise. My mother cleaned offices until her hands bled because rich people treated dignity like it belonged only to them. And tonight I watched the woman who comforted her in her final days stand in this ballroom while people laughed at her uniform. The silence afterward felt endless. Then something unexpected happened. One of the guests slowly began clapping. A grey-haired woman standing near the stage, soft at first, hesitant, then another joined, and another. Within seconds, applause spread quietly through the ballroom. Not loud, not celebratory, something deeper than that. Respect. Alina's eyes widened in disbelief. She instinctively stepped backward, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Her throat tightened painfully as tears threatened behind her eyes. Nobody had ever applauded her before. Not for surviving, not for sacrificing dreams quietly, not for carrying grief without bitterness. Vincent glanced toward her and saw it immediately. The fear behind her eyes. The instinct to disappear because she still believed she did not belong in rooms like this. Something about that realization unsettled him deeply. Vanessa looked around at the applause in complete humiliation. This is insane, she whispered. You are all acting like she is some kind of hero. Vincent looked directly at her. Maybe we simply forgot what one looks like. The applause slowly faded into silence again, but the atmosphere had changed forever now. Alina Brooks was no longer invisible inside that ballroom, and everyone knew it. Vincent walked toward her carefully, stopping only a few feet away. His voice lowered when he spoke again. Why did you never tell anyone who you were? Alina looked down at her trembling hands before answering softly, because people only respect stories like mine after they are over. The words hit the room harder than any speech that night, and for the second time since the gala began, Vincent Moretti found himself completely unable to look away from her. The gala ended early, but nobody forgot the silence that followed. Guests left the ballroom quietly beneath the golden chandeliers, their polished shoes echoing against marble floors that suddenly felt colder than before. Conversations stayed low. Forced smiles disappeared. For the first time in years, New York's elite walked out of a Moretti event looking unsettled instead of impressed. Alina remained near the piano long after most people had gone. She stood alone beside the towering windows overlooking Manhattan, her reflection faint against the city lights shimmering below. The ballroom finally felt empty enough for her breathing to slow again. She still could not understand what had happened tonight. Vincent Moretti had publicly defended her, ended an engagement, exposed powerful people in front of each other without raising his voice once. Men like him protected status above all else. Yet somehow he had protected her dignity instead. The thought made her uneasy. Footsteps approached softly behind her. Alina turned slightly and saw Vincent walking toward her without security, without assistance, without the cold wall of people usually surrounding him. Just Vincent. Somehow that felt far more intimidating. Everyone left, she said quietly. Vincent glanced around the ballroom. Half-empty champagne glasses remained abandoned across white tablecloths. The orchestra had packed away their instruments. Only the piano remained untouched beneath the chandelier light. Not everyone, he answered softly. Silence settled between them again. Not awkward, heavy, real. Alina lowered her eyes first. "I am sorry your engagement ended this way." Vincent studied her carefully for several seconds before speaking. "Do you always apologize for things that are not your fault?" The question caught her off guard completely. She blinked softly. "I just did not want to create problems." Vincent exhaled quietly, almost amused, but not cruelly. "Alina, the problem tonight was never you." Hearing her first name spoken gently by him unsettled her more than the ballroom confrontation itself. She quickly looked away toward the skyline beyond the windows. "People like me learn early that causing discomfort can cost us everything," she admitted softly. Vincent felt those words settle heavily inside him. "People like me." The sentence bothered him deeply because he knew exactly what she meant. Invisible workers, tired people, individuals expected to carry humiliation quietly so wealthy strangers could remain comfortable. His mother had lived inside that same reality for years. "Come with me," Vincent said suddenly. Alina frowned slightly. "What?" He nodded toward the service elevator near the ballroom exit. "There is something I want to show you." 20 minutes later. The city noise faded behind tinted car windows as Vincent's black sedan moved through the quieter streets of Brooklyn. Alina sat stiffly in the passenger seat, confused and nervous. She had never been alone with Vincent Moretti before tonight. The silence inside the car felt strangely calm instead of threatening. Finally, the sedan stopped in front of a narrow brick apartment building tucked between a laundromat and a corner pharmacy. Vincent looked toward the building slowly. "This was my first home," he said quietly. Alina stared at him in surprise. The neighborhood looked nothing like the luxury world surrounding his name now. Vincent stepped out first. Cold night air swept through the empty street, while distant sirens echoed somewhere far away. Alina followed carefully behind him up the cracked concrete steps. Inside the building, old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The hallway smelled faintly like detergent and worn carpet. Vincent stopped outside apartment 4B. His eyes rested on the faded door for a long moment. "My mother used to play old cassette recordings of piano music here because we could not afford lessons," he admitted quietly. She believed beautiful things helped people survive difficult lives. Alina felt something tighten painfully in her chest, hearing that. Vincent slowly looked at her then, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Tonight," he said carefully, "you reminded me of the version of myself I buried a long time ago." The hallway fell silent, and for the first time since the gala began, Alina realized Vincent Moretti was not simply protecting her dignity tonight. He was trying to rediscover his own. 3 months later, the city still talked about the night Vincent Moretti ended his engagement in front of Manhattan's elite. Gossip columns called it scandal. Business networks called it reckless. Socialites whispered about the mysterious Maid who made one of the most powerful men in New York walk away from a perfect public image without hesitation. But none of them knew the truth. None of them understood what really changed that night beneath the chandeliers and marble floors. Because the real story began afterward. Winter arrived quietly over the city, covering Brooklyn sidewalks in pale snow while warm lights glowed through apartment windows across the neighborhood. Inside the renovated concert hall on West 57th Street, hundreds of people filled velvet seats beneath golden balconies. Wealthy donors sat beside nurses. Hotel workers sat beside politicians. For once, nobody cared about status inside the room. Above the stage hung a simple sign written in soft white letters, "The Eleanor Moretti Foundation for Music and Healing." Vincent stood alone near the back of the auditorium, dressed in a black suit, his hands resting quietly in his pockets while guests continued entering the hall. He ignored the reporters waiting outside, ignored the cameras searching for statements about his cancelled engagement. Tonight was not about any of that. Tonight belonged to someone else. The lights dimmed slowly. Conversation faded into silence across the theater. Then a single spotlight touched the center of the stage. Alina Brooks walked forward quietly beneath the warm light, wearing a simple dark blue gown instead of a maid uniform for the first time in years. A soft murmur moved through the audience, not because she looked glamorous, but because she carried herself differently now. Her shoulders no longer curled inward apologetically. Her eyes no longer searched for exits every time attention touched her. She looked nervous, yes, human, but no longer invisible. Vincent watched from the shadows as Alina sat at the grand piano waiting beneath the spotlight. The same trembling fingers that once polished silver trays inside his estate now rested carefully above ivory keys worth more than most cars. But tonight nobody laughed. Nobody mocked her presence. The entire room waited with respect. Alina looked out toward the audience briefly before speaking softly into the microphone. My mother used to say, music reminds people they are not alone. The theatre fell completely silent. I stopped playing piano for many years after losing her. Alina continued carefully, but someone reminded me that surviving is not the same thing as living. Vincent lowered his gaze slightly after hearing the words. Around the auditorium, several guests quietly wiped tears from their eyes already. Then Alina began to play. Claire de Lune drifted gently through the theatre once more, soft and haunting beneath golden light. But tonight the melody sounded different, stronger somehow, not grief alone anymore. Healing. The music wrapped around the audience like warmth during winter. Nurses closed their eyes. Elderly couples held hands quietly. Even hardened businessmen sat motionless beneath the sound of something honest enough to reach places success never could. Vincent remained near the back of the theatre, watching silently while the woman once mocked as just a maid filled an entire concert hall with beauty no amount of money could purchase. And in that moment, he realized something his mother understood long before he ever did. The strongest people are often the ones the world trains itself not to see. The final note faded softly into silence. Nobody moved for several seconds. Then slowly, the entire theatre rose to its feet. The applause thundered through the hall like rain against glass. Alina looked stunned as she stood beside the piano, tears shining in her eyes while hundreds of strangers applauded not her pain, not her sacrifice, but her worth. Vincent did not clap immediately. He simply stood there in the shadows looking at her quietly, almost emotionally overwhelmed by the sight, because for the first time since his mother died 17 years ago, something inside him finally felt at peace. And that night, beneath the golden lights of New York City, the world remembered what dignity looks like.